Today we look at publicly funded research legislation that's come into effect in August this year. Could you briefly explain the legislation to us?
Okay, essentially it's a government initiative aimed at regulating the rights in innovations that are created primarily at universities, which make use of public funds,
Right.
and also the distribution of the benefits. It's an attempt to commercialize that intellectual property,
Right.
and then to find out who's in fact is going to benefit from that commercialization.
Exactly.
That in essence is what it is.
And then who does benefit, Llewellyn?
Well, if you look at it, I mean, initially you're looking at, well, with luck, you have an intellectual property fund. Now, that should fund the protection of the intellectual property where it's protectable. So you should get an increase in the number of patents for or trademarks or whatever filed. Then that also funds commercialization, taking it through and actually turning it into money.
Right.
I mean, primarily that's what intellectual property is about. You should, make it, it works if it makes a profit. Then distributing that profit. And what we're looking at currently is a major portion of that going to the actual innovators. Now, those are the people who created the intellectual property.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it?
It is. It is, because one, it stimulates the actual, their endeavors. Two, it'll keep them at the institution.
Absolutely. It's an incentive.
Exactly.
So if it was a student that came up with this big idea, he would grant the benefit to that.
Exactly, yes. A large portion of the benefits. Not all of them.
Right.
Because the ultimate owner of the intellectual property, or the initial owner, is not the inventor, not the creator. It is the institution, the university. And they then take a portion of that money, not the lion's share. And that is then used, one, to fund various other projects, primarily other projects which don't receive government funding. Because you never know, it's basic, groundbreaking research. You don't know what's going to come out of this. So, and at the moment it may seem esoteric, it may seem as though nothing's going to come out of it. So it's not going to get the same funding as a national energy creation project, for example. So that's that aspect to it. Secondly, it's creating the infrastructure to evaluate the intellectual property, to see if it's protectable, and to see, one, how to protect it, and then how to commercialize it. It's a lot of the onus is going to be, for the basics, will be pushed onto the universities or the institution, because it includes the CSIR, the Agricultural Research Council, but primarily universities, tertiary educational institutions, which would include technicons, I suppose. What
about the state? Where do they come in when it comes to the benefits?
Well, the state's view on it is, first of all, if this thing is, and let's be very optimistic and say that it's going to become a self-funding project, that means that less of my money, taxpayers' money, is going to go into funding these projects. With a bit of luck, that means more, and of course, I'm telling you right now that I'm pretty sure my tax burden won't be decreased, which means there'll be more tax money available for other projects. Secondly, it will also assist and aid in the creation of intellectual property, and South Africa is fairly poor at that. You know, we were looking at, or not we, the state was looking at places like Australia, places like the United States, and at the academic institutions, and they are filing a lot more, for example, patent applications than we are. Now, the questions you must then ask is why? Are academics not as good? The answer is no, they're just as good. Are our institutions not as good? No, they're just as good.
So what's the answer?
Money. And it was funding. Where I think the average South African researcher was receiving, for this sort of thing, something on the order of about $47, whereas his Australian counterpart was receiving just over 200.
So how then do you determine public funding?
Public funding essentially is any funding that is all or in part received from a public funding institution, the state, which is a problem, because the all, there is no problem. The part, there is a problem. Because how big or how small must that part be?
Well, that's the question. And who decides what to fund and what projects to fund and what not to fund?
Well, that of course it'll go before a board, a committee which will essentially evaluate the project and decide, okay, this is something worth doing. This is something I think is probably commercializable.
Yeah.
And it's for the good of, the benefit, the greater public good, which is what universities are supposedly for.
Sure.
So that's that aspect. But going back to the actual quantum of the funding, the amount is, if you want to be cynical at the moment, assuming you have a project which is funded, I don't know, at a university by a massive company which is putting in 100 million rand, and of that, and then the state is putting in 1,000. Technically, that's publicly funded, which means that the company does not own the rights in and to the invention, to the intellectual property.
Yeah. Very interesting.
That will need to be sorted out. It will be sorted out.
So there's a few challenges and loopholes, right?
Of
so
course.
it needs to be sorted out, but it's a brand new legislation, and
That's
and
right.
we'll just have to watch the space.